Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Also, very good. Please be seated. In the service of Compline, which starts on page 127 of your prayer book, the opening line, you don't need to go there, but the opening line is, our help is in the name of the Lord. And the response is, the maker of heaven and earth. And every week, your wonderful secretary here writes me an email and says, I enjoyed your sermon. I don't know why she listens to sermons, but that's good. And what is the title of your sermon? And every week I have to think, title of sermon. I'm an Episcopalian. We don't have titles. But this week the title of this sermon is, Our Help is in the Name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. It comes from the last verse of the psalm this morning, in case you're wondering. Well, let's start with the book of Esther, shall we? You all did a wonderful job. Jim, thank you for your leadership, and thank you all for your responses. The book of Esther is an Old Testament book that some people think shouldn't be in the Bible even, because it does not mention God anywhere in the book of Esther. But it is the story of God saving his people, the chosen race. And it's a wonderful story. I'll tell it to you briefly. There was a king who only Jim can pronounce his name. I cannot. And he was the king of the Persians. And at the time, Persia, which is now Iran, basically, had 127 different countries under it. It was like the place. So he was the most powerful king. And when he said something, it happened. And he had a wife whose name was not Esther. Her name was Vashti, and she disobeyed him once. And he had her executed. So people were a little afraid of this king, although there is question on whether he really had her executed or only banned her from Persia, but I'm not going to answer that question. And so he then had a beauty contest to find the most beautiful woman in all of Persia to marry for his second wife. And who should win the beauty contest but Esther? Yay! And that's the last time we're going to do that, because otherwise this sermon will take forever. And Esther becomes his wife and fails to tell him one little detail of her life, which is that she's Jewish. And her uncle Mordecai is at the court of the king. He's one of the king's advisors. But there's another guy, Haman, and he hates all the Jews. Why? I don't know. But he just hates them all and devises a plan to kill them all off, starting with Mordecai and moving his way down. He doesn't tell the king about his plan, but Mordecai finds out and goes to Esther and says, Esther, you are our only hope. And he says a wonderful line, which is, for you are the queen for such a time as this. And that, for such a time as this, is such a, it's a word that I hear all the time. And, well, God has called us to do this for such a time as this. But Mordecai says to Esther, for such a time as this, you're supposed to save all of the Jews. So I want you to go to the king and say, King, let's save the Jews. And Esther says, you have got to be kidding. I will have the same end as Vashti, because I'm not even allowed to speak unless the king speaks to me. And I'm never allowed to make a request unless the king opens the door to that. But she's very beautiful, and she has a dinner party for the king. And he comes along with Haman, and it is the night before Haman has planned the massacre. And the king says, Esther, you are so beautiful, and I love you so much. Ask anything and you'll have it. Pretty good opportunity. And Esther says, well, let me now tell you the truth. I'm Jewish, which in that case was, you're a slave, you're a servant, you're not in the aristocracy in general. And Haman has planned to do in all of us. And he's actually the bad guy because he hasn't asked your permission, it wasn't your plan, and it's not a good plan. And the king says, what are we going to do about it? And someone else at court says, well, there's some nice gallows right outside the window. Let's kill Haman instead of Mordecai. And that's what happens. It's an interesting thing. That's where the book of Esther kind of ends, is that the Jewish people are saved. There is a Jewish festival that happens every year on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and it is called Purim. Until this week I called it Purim, but it is properly called Purim. And it is the fun children's festival in the Jewish tradition. People dress in costumes, kind of like on Halloween. And they give food to the poor because that's what it says to do. And they give presents to each other because that's what it says to do. And they party and they eat cookies called Hamantaschen, which are little pockets with poppy seeds or apricot jam. And you can buy them at Safeway in March because it's a big holiday. And they celebrate that God came through for the people of Israel. And it's that our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. It's not that God is mentioned in the book. It's self-evident that it's God who accomplished that. Because Esther had the words and Mordecai had the wisdom, but God had the power. And so that's the story of Esther. You can ask me questions afterwards. I know actually nothing else about Esther, but it's a wonderful book to read, and it's kind of one of those good family books to read. So, I want to move on to the second half of the sermon, which is that today is actually the feast day of Saint Michael and all angels. And it's not an important enough feast day for us to celebrate it on this Sunday. It's been moved to probably tomorrow or Tuesday. But we're going to celebrate it today because it's a wonderful, wonderful holiday. The psalm that we read this morning, the first verse says, if God is on our side, how can we lose? And the feast day of St. Michael and all angels is about remembering that God has the power to do incredible things in our lives. To remember that he's the one who brings salvation, forgiveness, healing, all the things that God brings, and that angels are part of that. Now, I want to talk about angels before we move on to the important part of the sermon. Michelangelo, the great artist who built gigantic sculptures, painted a silly, silly picture of angels. And it's the most popular picture of angels there is. It's about two little round cherubs peeking over the top of a tall wall. Can you kind of picture it? If you go into a tchotchke store, there are pictures of Michelangelo's angels. That is not what any angel looks like in the Bible. First of all, when angels appear in the Bible, they have one sentence that they say. Fear not, don't be afraid. Well, why would I be afraid? Because angels are big. Angels are scary. They are not cute little cuddly angels. They are big, scary things. In the book of Leviticus, I think, there is a description of the size of a cherub. Cherub in our dictionary says it's a small angel. A cherub, the wingspan of a cherub is from one wall of a large room to another wall. It's at least 15 feet. These are not little mild-mannered things. And so angels are big, and they're scary, and they're powerful. And St. Michael, and we have a church in Issaquah called St. Michael and All Angels. St. Michael is one of the 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, and 2 others, whose names I can't remember. And he is the one who's always depicted guarding a gate or a door with a sword and a shield. And he's always looking scary. And Michael is God's angel who brings the power and the protection to God's people. Our help is in the name of the Lord, brought to you today by St. Michael. And St. Michael is if you think of angels, the first one that should come to mind is Michael. Does anyone here know what the word angel means? It is a wonderful word. It means messenger. That the angel is the one that brings messages. Remember the angel Gabriel went and met with Mary and told her about Jesus? He was a messenger. I had an assisting priest in a parish in New York where it was a very difficult parish. And I was not having a very fun time, and no one wanted to listen to me. And Father Herbert, who was about 85 years old at the time, went up to the front and he said, "All right, folks, listen up. You have an angel in your midst. Her name is Carola, and she's a messenger from God, and when she talks, listen." And things went better. They went, okay, she's a messenger, she's an angel. I liked that. It helped ministry there a lot. I stayed many years. But we're to listen to what angels have to say. Many of us think of angels as Hallmark cards or what sits at the top of our Christmas tree. I had a dear friend who led a women's retreat at a church where I was attending, and at this retreat, she was a priest, she knew better, maybe, but she said, "So, you are all angels, right?" Okay. If you're an angel in heaven, what job will you have in heaven? And do you know that of the 40 women there, 12 of them wanted to iron other angels' outfits? I hope we have higher aspirations than that. I don't even own an iron or an ironing board. I see no reason for it. But what do angels really do? Is it just ironing? One of the really good questions is that we really don't know. We don't know a lot other than that they are messengers and that they are a created order. There's humans, and there's angels, and there's God, and there are a few other created orders if you read the book of Revelation, but it's a little confusing. But we do not become angels. Got that? I'm your messenger, believe me. I'm sorry. You look really disappointed. You do not become an angel. You are higher than the angels. God created humans to love and to be in relationship with. Angels have to work really hard and be messengers. So that's not part of our job. We get to enjoy forever. Another little thing about angels is that every Sunday in the Eucharistic prayer, right before the Sanctus, the Holy, 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 I say with angels and archangels and with all the company of heaven. Does that ring any bell with you? There is a sense that there is an angelic choir, if you will, or an angelic host who are worshiping God day and night. And that's a big part of their job, if they're not standing with a sword and shield. And we join with them in that worship of God. Not just on Sunday mornings, but in all of our life. In about a month, we have All Saints' Day. And a big sense of All Saints' Day is that those whom we have loved and who have gone before us are with that angelic host, and we, through the veil, or from this side, we join in that worship. And that God rejoices in that worship and enters into that worship. And I pray that in our Sunday worship or in our quiet worship, we come into thin places where we go, oh, yeah, that's really happening. There is a deep worship. There is a relationship. I can be part of that deep worship. That is sometimes not the case. Sometimes we're writing out our grocery list during worship or thinking about what we forgot to do this week. But sometimes we enter deeply into worship. But finally, I want to say that part of celebrating St. Michael and all the angels and knowing that God has created angels and that they exist, not as cute little guys, but as great big guys, is that they are part of God's plan of salvation, of rescue, of being on our side, of fighting battles for us. We aren't real fond anymore of Onward Christian Soldier type of songs because we don't want to think about wars and things. But there is a reality that life has its difficulties. Amen? And that God is in the midst of those difficulties and gives us help and power and healing and hope in the midst of that, and that angels are a part of that. Amen.
Amen.